Okay, so today we're going to be talking about writing fractions as percents. So before we begin, I just want to remind you that percents, we deal with the whole chapter with percents. We're talking about per 100, so we're comparing a number to 100. So when I write a fraction as a percent, your 100 is going to be represented in the denominator. So looking at our first problem, 2/5. What I want to happen is I want to get 2/5 to represent a fraction out of 100, so therefore I can write it as a percent. So because I want 5 to become 100, I'm going to multiply 5 by 20 because 5 times 20 is 100. Therefore you multiply the numerator by the same thing. 2 times 20 is 40. So now I have this number, this 40, being compared to 100. That represents 40%. So 40% means the same thing as 2/5, okay, or 40 hundredths. It represents the same thing. That's 40 being compared to 100. When I look at 1/25, it's the same thing. This is going to be out of 100. So how am I going to go from 25 to 100? You're going to multiply it by 4. So 25 times 4 is 100, and 1 times 4 is 4. So the percent that's going to be written here is just 4% because it's 4 hundredths, comparing 4 to 100. So 4% here is the same thing as 1/25. So that's how you write a fraction as a percent. When I go from a decimal to a percent, it's the same type of thing. So I'm going to then have 0.2 or 2/10, and I want to write it as a percent. Now there's a couple ways you could do this. You can write it as 2/10, and then because I know a fraction has to be out of 100 to be compared to a percent, I can multiply these both by 10 to get 20 hundredths. This represents 20%. Okay? Another way to think of it is that when you change a decimal to a percent, you're kind of multiplying by 100. I'm changing it. So when I multiply this by 100, I'm moving the decimal back 2 places. Here's my new decimal, and I'm going to put my 0 in here to get the 20% as well. So for 1 and 500ths, once again, I can either move the decimal back 2 places. That's going to be 105%. Or I can think of it as a fraction. 1 and 5 hundredths, actually. It's already out of 100, but I have this 1. So I'm going to change this into an improper. So 100 times 1 is 100, plus 5 is 105 hundredths, which is also how you can write your 105%. Okay? Next, we're going to talk about writing fractions as decimals. Now, a fraction to a decimal, the only way you can really do it is by dividing. So for 1/3, I'm going to take my numerator of 1, and I'm going to divide it by 3. Now this may be one you already know. So 3 can't go into 1, so add a decimal. And a 0 if you wish. Add a 0. 3 goes into 10 3 times. Subtract your 9. Get 1, add a 0, and drop it. 3 goes into 10 3 times. Subtract your 9, add a 1, drop your 0. You see that it's repeating. And what's repeating is the 3. So to correctly write out 1/3 as a repeating decimal, you put 0.3 with a bar right over the 3. Get rid of that line there. Okay, and that's it. 3/10. Same thing. I'm going to take 3 and divide it by 10. It's always the top number being divided. And that should make sense because your fractions are always less than 1. So 10 doesn't go into 3, so add a decimal point. 10 goes into 30. 10 goes into 30. There it goes. 3 times. 3 times 10 is 30, and it goes in evenly. So 3/10 is the same thing as, you'll have it, 3/10. Okay, so you're using division in order to change, there we go, in order to change your fractions to decimals. Changing decimals to fractions, you're going to use the place value. So if I read this out correctly, this is 75 hundredths. So I'm going to put 75 over 100. 75 hundredths. Now we know we can't leave our fraction this way. We need to simplify it. So you can simplify it by 5 if you wish, but I know I can divide actually by 25. So 75 divided by 25 is 3. 100 divided by 25 is 4. My answer is 3/4. Okay, the next one, this is 9. This is tenths, hundredths, thousandths. And then you actually can't simplify 9 thousandths, and so you are done. Okay, so this is decimals as fractions. Now we're almost done. Now I'm going to change each of these to a percent, or I'm sorry, each percent into a fraction and a decimal. So change percent to fraction and decimal. Okay, so I don't even know what number I'm on, and I'm on 9. So I'm going to do 5% first. Okay, so 5% as a fraction means 5 over 100, because remember, when you compare a fraction to a percent, percents are always out of 100. Okay, before I simplify this, I'm also going to write it as my decimal. This is 5 hundredths, which I know can be written as 0.05 because this is in the hundredth spot. Now I'm going to simplify, so I have my correct fraction, and I get 1/20th. So here's my fraction form, here's my decimal form. Remember, another way to change it to a fraction, or I'm sorry, your decimal, is to take your decimal point, and now instead of moving it back, we're going the opposite direction. 2 places, add your decimal point and your 0. Okay, so now let's look at, let's do 26%. So once again, I'm going to write that over 100 to write it as a fraction. This is 26 hundredths, so I can also write my decimal, which is 0.26, because this is in the hundredths spot. Okay, and I'm going to divide this guy to simplify him by 2, and I get 13/50. That is my answer for my fraction, and that is my answer for my decimal. Okay, do not forget your magic number with percents is always 100. So how can you associate each of these parts with 100? That's what you're trying to do. Okay, hope this jogged your memory. If you need to watch any part of it again, of course you're allowed to go back and do that. Make sure that you are using your group in order to answer these questions, and you're also telling myself or Mrs. Rangel that you have completed this, so we make sure that you've watched each of these podcasts. All right, thanks.